probably, some of you may remember my initial dynamic Power BI presentation, which was actually 2 years ago now, back when I was still part of Pragmatic Works. As you may know, Pragmatic Works merged with 3Cloud just about a year, well, half year ago now, I guess. And that's where I am now. I am a former past board member, which no longer means nearly what it meant just a few months ago, unfortunately. I've got a lot of years experience with data. I was working with SQL Server for a lot of years, did a lot of data warehousing, and now I focus mainly on Power BI with an Azure tilt to it. I also do a lot of work in Azure. I live in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State, and that is my email address. I want everyone who attends to feel free to email me with questions or suggestions, or even suggestions on future webinars. Advanced dynamic reporting. I know that a lot of you are beginners, and I don't want you to feel intimidated by that. This whole presentation is going to be made in a way that you can, maybe if you don't understand the code itself, you'll understand the concepts that we're using. You'll be able to see the visualizations, and you're going to get an example file with all the code in it. So don't feel intimidated. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'll stop a few times to answer, and hopefully we'll be able to give value to everyone of all levels that it's attending. Power BI is something that we're all using in the enterprise now. For a few years there, it was all about adoption, and while it's still about adoption, it's really now something that most major companies are using. A lot of you are switching back and forth between Power BI and other reporting tools such as Tableau, or even still just using Excel. Today, we're going to talk about what makes Power BI unique in my mind, which is that you can create reports that feel really natural and are very familiar and comfortable to your users. All of us have been using Microsoft tools and applications for a very long time now. And because of the familiar tools and the familiar interfaces, you can use Power BI to create something that feels like a very natural application to your user, and they'll stop thinking of it as a report and start thinking of it more as the way they get their data, the way they understand their insights, and the way that they can better move their company forward by making better predictive analysis and understanding the trends. And then, of course, I've got my cute little cartoons, which I always have in each presentation I do for you guys. The advantages of advanced dynamic techniques. We want to craft reports that engage users again and again, and I've taken to calling this Power BI trickery. You'll see why. What we're doing is doing things that you're not supposed to be able to do in Power BI, and we're doing them from a series of tricks, some of which are just awesome, some of which are great, but you have to be very careful in how you use them because they can cause performance issues if you're not very careful. And some, I think, are pretty new to the community, even though it turned out that some of them weren't that hard to do. So the first question is, if you make a report, will they use it? Are they just going to log on every day, write down a few KPIs from it, and then go on to the next thing? Are they going to log on to the service, go to the visualization they need, and then just download it to Excel to do more work with it? Or are they going to be able to log on to the report you made, spend time exploring the data, and are they going to gain insights that are going to make it valuable to the company? Are they going to learn things that will help them make decisions in the upcoming meetings they have that day? Will they be able to take that report to a meeting and display the gains they're making or the issues and actually have data there that they can back it up and show examples without having to go through a lot of manipulation with other tools to get to where they need? You're going to want to find the questions. More often these days, Power BI developer is given a partial set of requirements. I can't emphasize this enough. I think that for those of us who are consultants, and I think probably for those of us who are working for corporations too, for a long time we were used to the whole waterfall and having business analysts give us very detailed requirements. That doesn't happen so often anymore, and a lot of times even the best business analysts aren't familiar enough with Power BI to give the kind of requirements that can help you build the visualizations you want. You might know what fields you want and what data you want and what you need to return as far as this percentage or this KPI, or I need to know what this variance is over here. But what do they want to see? What do they want to learn from it? It's almost like building a data warehouse, but you're just building a small report with a small data model behind it. You're going to need to find out what they really want to learn from it and what would give them the most value, and then provide that. And why are you going to do that? You're going to spark the insights. Think of yourself, even if you're a beginner, you are now a data mentor. What does that mean? It means you're going to have this data. You're going to be able to create reports with visualizations that your users can use to understand things that they didn't even know were in their data. You might find ways to show them different insights one against the other that will suddenly make clear to them where their outliers are. You might be able to show them, oh, this department is performing above and beyond everything else, and it wasn't showing up before because I was only looking at it as part of the larger group. There's a ton of different ways you can show insights through Power BI, and the best of all is when you make it engaging by letting the user themselves discover that. When they dig down into the data, they aren't just finding what they want to learn and what they want to use. They're actually learning about their data, and they'll come back to it time and time again. The reports that are more interactive are quickly the most used reports in any organization. At one large chemical company that I was at last year, we made a series of just 3 reports that all use these dynamic techniques. And those 3 reports quickly became the 1, 2, and 3rd report of that entire company's report structure, which included over 500 reports. It's something that you're going to want to do over and over again once you start using it, because your users will love you for it. So you're going to want to be dynamic. It isn't enough to place data in a table and hope that the story will tell itself. You can go further than that. And some of you may recognize this cartoon way back from the first dynamic presentation I did just a couple years ago. I think I'm going to keep using it every time I do this. And in this presentation, we're going to create date slicers that go beyond what's natively allowed. All of you have used things like Tableau or some other reporting tools. Know that you have date slicers in those that aren't available in Power BI. We're going to learn how to do those today. It's tricky and you have to be very careful performance-wise, but you can still do it if your users are insisting on it, or especially if they're saying, if I can't do this, I'm going back to that other reporting system, whatever that is. We're going to craft dynamic columns today for our visualizations. Again, something that can be super useful and your users will love, but you have to be very careful. Otherwise, you're going to run into performance issues, and we'll go over what might cause that as we get to that part. We're going to go over how to utilize the report space on your page to encourage your users to analyze in ways that they hadn't thought of before. Let them do the digging and compare different metrics against each other to find the information they can really use. And then we're going to let users choose their own trend lines, which is another really useful ability for users to look at, oh, I want to see this date period against that date period. Oh, and then add a 3rd one for me. Nope, take it away. You'll see all that today. And Power BI Trickery, this is my new term. Power BI Trickery is the practice of using advanced techniques to create new ways to see, compare, and understand data in ways that Power BI doesn't do without some manipulation of either data model or specialized measures, or both, most often both. And the most common use I've found so far for Power BI Trickery are to compare date periods that aren't linear and might not be the same number of days. This is what I was talking about, where you have other reporting tools that do this for your users, and they may use that as an objection to stop from using Power BI. Another really good reason to use this type of tool is that For instance, say you're a retailer and you have sales that happen periodically, and you want to see the difference in performance just around those sales periods or those holiday periods. And what you can do using this is to actually create a slicer that will bring in just those periods that you want to see and let you compare them easily, where with Power BI, otherwise you're going to have to, say, oh, this date to that date. So this is a great way to be able to do that without a lot of work for your users. Another frequent use of Power BI Trickery is to add or remove columns in a visualization with a slicer. This isn't something Power BI is supposed to be able to do, but we can fake the effect. A lot of what we're going to do today is learn to fake effects. As far as your users are concerned, they're going to think that you're really removing and putting new trend lines in. All you're doing is making them visible or invisible. And then, of course, last but not least, dynamic columns, which I find that people are still learning to use and which are still very useful and possibly dangerous if you don't use them in the right way. So we'll go over that again today. The whole point of this is we're going to give the users the tools they need to feel like they're using an application to find their own answers, to feel like they don't have to download the data and put it into Excel to get the answers they need. And just the warning I give every time I talk about this, you're going to get users that are going to download to Excel anyways. There's nothing you can do about stopping that. But the best thing you can do is find out what they're doing in Excel and give them that inside Power BI. And you'll find that a portion of them, a good portion of them, will eventually realize, hey, I don't have to do all this work every day. And they'll start using the reports you give them. The techniques we're going to use today. What if parameters? These are parameters that you can use to do things like have top 10, top 5, to allow your users to determine how many records they want to see. Measures with switch. These are great for determining what's in a column. They're also a really useful technique for changing the values that go into a trend line and allowing us to hide and display trend lines at will. You'll see that pretty soon. We're going to do unpivoted data for dynamic visualizations. This is how we manage to create dynamic columns. It's confusing at first, but once you get it, it's so easy. And again, I'm providing you the code to do this on your own, and I will be available for questions. I always end up answering questions for people after these webinars. Vanishing trend lines. Again, this goes with the measures with switch, but it also is on its own because it's something that I've never actually seen anyone do before, and I just came across this recently. And clever use of common visualizations. There's something to be said for just doing the simple things that we always do, but doing it in ways that provide users more insight than they would otherwise have. For instance, we'll see usage where we might put 2 top 10 lists on a page right next to each other and provide a list of metrics that they can look at on either of the top 10 lists. And they'll be able to find out, am I performing at the department level, or is it maybe at the representative level? Where are these numbers coming from? And compare those against each other to really find out where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are. So I'm going to pause now and take some questions. If I can find where they are. Oh, here we go. This recording will be shared later. It seems like a few people have asked about that, and yes, you'll be able to get a copy of it. Can you recommend a user-friendly way for a report consumer to filter a report by a long list of values? By 1,000 unique order numbers. For the only way I could think of doing that is if you had a table that you imported with those and created a measure that only got what was in that table. That's something I'd be happy to talk with you about offline. And I do not know when the February desktop update will be available. Unfortunately, I don't get information like that. Oh, okay, good question. How does these techniques work with direct query data sources like SSAS? If you're doing direct query, some of these will work, some of them won't work. The dynamic columns have to take place inside your data model. So the only way to do that would be to actually create the dynamic table inside your data model and then use it from there. That would be a whole nother presentation that we'd have to get to, but some of the other ones, that a lot of them happen actually with DAX, so you'll be able to do the DAX. And let's see if I got to all of them. Do you know how to create a static vertical line based on a value? Yeah, and actually I think I can show you that as we go along. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the Power BI file. Okay. And I'll come down and answer more questions in a while. So this whole file I've called Power BI Trickery. Again, I'm not using the file on the service, I'm using it on my desktop, so you're going to see some of the desktop features as far as okay. So when we're comparing, we're going to start with comparing date periods with similar characteristics. Sometimes a client will need, or if you're working in a company, obviously your client in that case would be your users, will need you to compare periods that don't fit into the common Power BI formulas. One example might be a calendar that doesn't fit into any known customer calendars. Another is a case where you may want to group sales periods in 2.5 months at a time, or only look at days surrounding a disaster or a holiday. Again, for the person who asked earlier, if you're using a direct query, you're going to have to do this in your data warehouse and then have that table ready to go. If you have the table ready to go in the correct way, it'll still work. To do this easily, we're going to create two extra tables. One slicer table containing the groupings we wish to look at, and another date table that contains all the dates for each event. It's a pain, but it does the trick. And though it uses a two-way relationship, it doesn't tend to harm performance much, even when the fact tables contain millions of rows, because these date tables aren't terribly big. If you're going to make them terribly big, this probably won't work. So you're going to want to use, the minimum amount of dates that you need. And let me give you this is an example. For here I have just three choices in my slicer. I have all dates, holiday period, all dates but holiday date periods. And then I have these holidays. And what I've done is I've created a table that has literally the dates that I want to be considered. For Thanksgiving, I have it looking through of 2020. I have it from the 24th until the 26th, and that's my Thanksgiving period. Why would I want to do this? Say I'm a retailer and I have a sale every year at Thanksgiving and another sale every year at Veterans Day. Here's my way to look at my holiday date periods, compare how we did on the sales. Not just between, the different holidays, but year over year, I can look and see, how did I do it New Year's last year? And it's going to find the right dates for that sale from last year without me having to do a lot of DAX to figure out, oh yeah, we had sales from this date to that date last year. It's all right here in the table. And because it's a very narrow table and it doesn't have millions of rows, it's going to be pretty fast. This is something that you would find very, very useful if, for instance, you wanted to look at disease surrounding a holiday, or different holidays. Say you want to look at the differences between the sales that you had in your retail environment from 5 days surrounding Thanksgiving and the 5 days surrounding Christmas and the 5 days surrounding maybe Valentine's Day. And you want to be able to compare those sales against each other to learn what's been successful and what doesn't work, and even look year over year to see what the differences are between those two. So the way you do that is you're going to create extra tables, one that's going to be a slicer table and the other one that's going to have the dates that you need in it and the holiday periods that you need in it. And I don't know how many of you were able to see when I showed the tables actually inside Power Query, but we'll go through that again as we get to it. And also, again, you're going to have this file, so you'll be able to do this yourself. And one thing you'll find is that as you go into Power Query, you can right-click on any of the queries within Power Query and then literally paste it into another file. So if you want to find out how things work, you can do that yourself. And you can, mess with this 1,000 ways and learn how to do it without fear of ruining anything. You'll always be able to go back to the original file. So let's take a look at what we've created. Okay, so here's an example of using nonlinear date periods. Again, this is something where you might want to be able to compare two at once, or you might want to just look at one at a time. And one of the ways you do two at once would be, for instance, instead of having two different visuals here, you might have the same visual here. And instead of having a long list of buttons for your day periods, you might use two drop-down slicers. So you could compare literally Christmas against, MLK Day, July 4th against Valentine's Day, and really see how you're doing. And this is where users will start playing with things. And the other fun thing you can do is you could have maybe Christmas this year against Christmas next year, or Christmas 2 years ago against this year's Christmas, and see where you're being successful, where the weaknesses are, where the trends are, and what you can do to make things better for your corporation, whatever it is that you do. We also have gone a little bit further in this particular visualization, and I actually have a dynamic column going here as well. We're going to get to dynamic columns, but let me show you how it works as long as I have it here. This visualization down in the bottom, you'll see a column called chosen grouping. Sometimes I'll call it chosen grouping. Sometimes I'll just put a dot there as a placeholder. The important thing is if ever you're going to use dynamic columns or compare different periods or do anything where you're doing some of this dynamic Power BI, dynamic DAX, dynamic Power Query, you want to make sure that you always have specific titles that will tell your users exactly what they're looking at. This is really important. And I can show you just quickly, most of you already know, but for those of you who are beginners, if I click on a visualization and I click on the paintbrush and go to Format and look at Title, I can create what's called a title measure or a label. And you'll see inside the Power BI file, I have a few here. And in this case, I'm looking at the title for line chart. So I can look at that here. And here's how I create that. I'm using the selected values from the various slicers I've created. And it's just putting together text like you would put together text in SQL or any other program that you're using. Just using these as variables. And again, if this is confusing you, don't worry, you have all the examples here. They're very simple to use, and you can always feel free to email me with questions about any of them. So here I can see I'm showing the top 12, and this top 12 is the top N. We've talked about the what if parameter. The way we create a what if parameter is really simple. If you go to the modeling tab of Power BI and click what if, new parameter, you immediately get a what if parameter. You can name it whatever you want. You can choose the data type. You can make it a whole number or a decimal number. You can choose the minimum and the maximum. And then once you hit OK, it's going to create a table that's just called top N, and then you can rename it to whatever you want. It's just generating a series of numbers. But the really cool thing about that is when I use that series of numbers in a measure, I can change how many records I'm showing. So why is that important? It's because it engages your users. It allows your users to see how many records they want, and it gives them a sense of control over their data. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to your users to feel like they have some sort of control over the data that they're looking at and what they're able to change within a data set that they're seeing. For instance, again, if I change this to MLK Day, now I can see I'm looking at the top 2 sales records by month and year for MLK Day, and it's grouped by city and state. And I have all that from my title for line chart that I made. Again, you see I have the min date, the max date, the holiday, which dynamic column I've chosen, how many records I've chosen, and I've just shoved all that into a label. I'm going to stop and take questions again in a minute because I know I'm going through a lot very quickly. Again, I've done the same thing here with a bar chart. Here we have the vendor name. We're just doing this by vendor. But then I have this chosen metric. What's the chosen metric? It's not your dynamic column. It's your chosen metric, which is a measure. And it's just using switch, as I mentioned we would do earlier. It just says if they choose the quantity or sales or both, I give them this. I choose what goes in that column by whatever they choose in the slicer. And we'll do that over and over again. And again, what we're doing here is we're giving the users the ability to make choices on their own, to choose how their data looks and what they're able to see. And see, I just changed from quantity sold to total sales, and the data changes with it. And that's just a slicer. But it gives the users, again, the ability to really feel like they're changing things. Now I'm going to go to the next page, which is something that even you advanced users probably haven't done before because it's not hard. It's just something that I never thought of to do in all my years of Power BI until recently. Swapping trend lines. The line chart is displaying the selected metric from the sales table, as well as a trend line with a cumulative average of the number of previous months chosen. For instance, the user chooses a month and a year that they wish to look at, and then they choose what time period they want to compare it with from a slicer. To further make this more dynamic and reduce the number of visualizations needed, a slicer to choose between quantity sold and sales amount is offered. This is all done via measure. There are 3 cumulative measures at play below. The cumulative quantity and cumulative sales are standard. Each looks at the time period they are to accumulate and chooses either that quantity or sales. When the other metric is chosen, though, they are blank and appear to no longer be part of the visualization. Poof, it's magic. They've vanished. You've made trend lines go away or come back in a measure, which you're not supposed to be able to do. But it's not anything magic at all. It's very simple, actually. all we've done here, let me show you the measure. Is we have this cumulative parallel. This chooses which of the metrics you're going to be using inside your line chart down here based on your slicer values. Average by metric parallel period, which is this here. I know it's confusing. But again, you have all these measures here that are written for you. You're going to be able to go through them. And as you can see, we're using switch here for which trend to use based on the slicer value, which is the selected value of the time period. We're going to say, oh, if they choose 1, then let's take the month minus 2, 2, the month minus 4, and so on and so on. So let me show you how that works now. So I'm choosing to look at, let's say, February 2019, and I want to see the 3 months average. So now I can see, oh, here's the average over 3 months. And I can also change that to be quantity sold or both. I'm just swapping trend lines out over here so that you can easily see different things as a user. If something matters to me, I can have multiple parallel time periods as well. So you might have 2 or 3 different time periods, and you might have one of the values be nothing. And if you have one be nothing, that in that switch statement you used, you're going to put a blank instead of a value, and that trend line will simply seem to go away. And that's where we have this. It's the amazing vanishing trend line. The trend line below is displaying the selected metric from the sales table, as well as up to 2 different parallel trend lines. Oops, let me get that out of there. For instance, if the user chooses a month and year they wish to look at, then they choose the first trend line. So let's choose March, and we want to see, compare that to 1 month ago. So we have that. Now the second parallel line, well, I also want to see 2 months ago. So show me that. Or, actually, I think I might not have data for that in there. Let's try. We have way too many dates in this table. But say I want to change it to none, that trend line would go away. Here we go. Oh, see, we have both the same trend line now, so they're. And you will find this if you hover over the actual columns in the values, you'll be able to see which measure you want to look at to see how it's created. And it's just doing a switch between these selected metrics. And I will stop now and I will take questions because I know this must be confusing a lot of people. Okay, I'm hold on a second. I'm going back to find out. Oh, someone said try Teams next time, and I couldn't agree more. I'm hoping that we will start using Teams for our webinars. I use Teams every day. Okay. Can you get access to the Power BI desktop file? Yes, you will find in the included handout that's inside the go to webinar. On the last page, there's a link to a Google Drive that has all these files in it, and you can download them. The same people, a lot of people are asking about the Power BI file. Actually, if you'd like, I will also, well, no, actually, you should be able to get it just very easily. Is there any way to get a copy of the file? Yes, you will all have copies of the file. No one worry about that. Okay, someone asked, would you use the same concept for measures, labels, or the top records for account of data? Yes, absolutely. I find that even though it can seem a bit tedious, the more times you use labels in your measures and all around your file, the more useful it is to your users, because it's not always easy as a user who's not working with data all day, every day, to understand exactly what they're looking at. And especially when you're using different trend lines and changing things up, to always have that title be changing on your visualizations is just huge. Someone said good DAX code. Thank you very much. That's what I do. Okay. Someone asked, can you explain the context users should be interpreting the parallel period lines? That's a good question, and the answer is you would do this depending on what your requirements were. This is just a quick example that might not necessarily be useful for you at all. But what probably is always going to be useful is something like having month to date 1 month ago, month to date 2 months ago, or year to date 1 month ago, year to date 2 months ago. These are kinds of measures that you're easily able to compare against each other and see how things are looking through a series of trends. Or sometimes you just want to know what was the average sale during the month last month, what was the average profit during the month 2 months ago, these types of things. So the context that users would be using these trend lines in is going to vary depending on the report, but you'll always use the same technique. You'll create a measure that has the data that you want in it, and then you'll switch back and forth depending on what they choose inside the slicers that you create. The trend is not the same over the same axis month. Yeah, that again is something that this is just for instance, the reason I created it that way when I created this report was I've been asked to create an average of sales over a period of time. And then I took that and I showed what the average was for that whole previous month, even though it was a longer average that I was using. It probably could have used a more simple visualization. I think next time I'll remember to use something that's a little more simple and easy to understand. How can you choose the dollar sign? Oh, that's a good question for a new user. Let's see, sales month to date. If I click on a measure that I've just created, I can go to Format. If I click on it, you'll see it immediately opens Measure Tools. And I have the choice of Format Currency. I can do it up here, or I can just hit the dollar sign. Either way, it does the same thing. Or I could change it to a decimal number and then not have the dollar sign at all. Oh, I see what you're saying. How can you show the dollar sign when you use the total sales and not when you choose the quantity? The way you do that is you have your slicer do the switch, and you're not doing the formatting within the visual. You're doing the formatting within the actual measure. So if it changes to a different measure and that measure is formatted with a dollar sign, it will show the dollar sign. If then your other measure that you're switching back and forth with doesn't have a dollar sign, the dollar sign will go away. Unable to get the Power Desktop link, can it be emailed? If you email me at the address after we're done here, I'll make sure that you get that, Wendy. Okay, there are a few people that can't get to the Google drive, just email me and I'll make sure that you get a copy. And everyone has access to the DAX code, which is in the file, which is in the Google Drive link. And if you don't have that, please email me and I will make sure you get it. Anastasia, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, but if you email me as well, I will help you with what you're talking about in the formatting. How do I make the groups for my measures? This is a good question. It's super easy. And I do this all the time, and I would highly recommend doing it. It's so much easier when you have a ton of measures to look and say, oh, here's my dynamic measures. Here's my sum measures. And the easy way to do that, the easiest way in the world to do that, is if you go to the home screen of your Power BI file and click this enter data here. Make up a table with an underscore before it so it comes before the other tables. And then type in your name, measures, whatever. Then I hit load. And I now have a measure table. And create a new measure. Test equals 1. I now have a measure in that whatever table. And then what I like to do, just to be a little bit overly picky, is then I would hide the column that came with the table. And now when I come back there, it's going to be a measure table when I reopen this. And that's all I do to make my measure tables. It's super easy. I would recommend you always do it. It gets really confusing when your measures are mixed in with your regular tables. And I'm going to type, my email is in the, if you look at the Power BI Trickery Advanced Dynamic Techniques handout that's in the actual GoToMeeting, you'll see my email is on the first slide. And if not, I'll make sure that we type it in here so that you can see it as well. Oh wait, here we go. It won't let me type in here. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the file and stop taking questions for a while. Okay, dynamic data sets and dynamic columns. This is where we do a couple of things that I spoke about in the PowerPoint. Number one is having two groupings of data right next to each other that your users can use to compare different categories, different levels of hierarchy, almost anything that you can compare that your users might be trying to figure out, where is my issue? Is it coming at the regional level or is it coming at the store level? Are the warehouses underperforming or is the issue coming with transportation? These are all kinds of issues that you can easily be able to get more insight into by having two tables next to each other. And I'll say this, they don't have to be dynamic tables. This is a technique that I use all the time with just a slicer above each table. And it can do wonders to help. You know, I might just have here, this side might be my regional and this side might be my local. And having them side by side and a slicer over them to choose different things to look at will be just huge in helping users to understand where their issues are and what the trends are. So here I have two dynamic column tables. And here I'm choosing what I want to group by. And let's say I choose city and state. This just changed to be city and state. As you can see, the values updated down at the bottom here. And now I can compare how are we doing by vendor versus city and state. And I can see, oh, well, this Boots in America Foods is doing the best. And oh, look, they might be in Baton Rouge. I don't know if that's true. I'm just guessing. But if I'm a user who knows my vendors and who knows my locations, I'll be able to use this to look at all sorts of different things. You might have as many as 4 or 5 options in this list, I would recommend never going beyond that. And the reason is, to get this to work, you have to do a few very complex things. And the first couple times you do it, it's going to seem hard. After that, this is something you can do without even thinking about. And fortunately, you have an example file, so it's not going to be anything that you won't be able to figure out the first time. You're just going to have to do some copy and pasting the first couple times until you do it. What we do to create dynamic columns is we go into Power Query, and let me show you that. And I think I actually have to show you a different file here. Okay, can you see the Power Query editor now? So what we're doing here is, first I've created a second little table that just has my three measures in it. Or I'm sorry, not 3 measures, my 3 values in it. Like I have these quantity or sales. I create all these kinds of little disconnected tables so that you can make slices off of them constantly. It's a good habit to get into. Same thing again, my trend time period. I'm not getting this out of a big table. I just have a little disconnected slicer table. Can you guys see this? See the Power Query here? Or are you only seeing the front end at this moment? Okay, good. Great, thank you. Just wanted to check because someone just said they want to see what the model looks like, and we're working in the model now. So, and I will actually show you the relationships as well. How do I create this table? Okay, so I have a fact table. And as you can see, the fact table is sales. And what I've done here is I've made a reference to the sales table. So to do that, all I did was right-click on the sales table, and I clicked reference, and it made this new table, which is a reference to the sales table. Then I removed all the columns except the unique one. And for this particular table, I had to create a unique index because the store number wasn't unique in that table. So I created a unique index, and the way you do that is also very simple. Here's added index, that's where I did that. To create an index, you just go to add column, index column, and boom, insert step, and if you hit insert, you'll have an index column. I'm not going to do that now because it's already here. As you can see, it just creates an index column either from 1 or 0, depending on what you choose. This can also be a really good technique to use if you have GUIDs in your tables, in your queries. GUIDs can be really useful as unique identifiers for joining things on, but if you're having a lot of trouble with performance, you might want to replace those GUIDs with indexes, and I probably will do a blog post or something on that at some point, because it's a lot easier for Power BI to sort on indexes than it is on those gigantic text fields. But back to the dynamic table. So the next thing I did was I removed all the columns except what I wanted to be able to sort by. And in this case, I wanted to say, let's look at store numbers, categories, and vendor numbers. So then I went ahead and I did something called an unpivot. And the way you unpivot is you can choose the column that you're going to be using as your unique index. Oops. For some reason, screen sharing just paused on me. Hold on a second. Let's see if I can get that to work again. Okay, you should see it again. Okay, so the first thing I did is I choose the column that I want to unpivot everything else on. I right-click on it, and if you look down here, you'll see it's unpivot on other columns. So that's what I did, and that's what the next step is here. You still can't see it? Rats, 1 second. How about now? Do you guys see it now? Yay, okay. Thank you all. GoToMeeting is just being tricky today. I don't know what's up with that. It's usually much, much better than this. Okay, so what I did was, let me go back and show you. So I right-clicked on index, which is my unique column. You always have to have a unique column to do this, or you won't be able to join it to anything else. And then I unpivot other columns by just going down here and selecting that, which takes me to my next step. And now what I have is two columns called attribute and value. And this always happens when you unpivot other columns. And in this attribute field, I have those three values over and over and over and over again, but each time associated with an index. So I now have basically my index times 3. This table got long. Okay, the great thing about Power BI is that it handles long tables super well as long as they're very narrow. Now here's the but. If you have more than 5 or 6 million rows in this data model, don't do this. It'll just slow things way down. This is really the best when you have just, a few 100,000 rows at best. Then it's really fast. You don't have anything to worry about. Now we don't need this value. And the other thing I did here was I decided to just go an extra step. You don't have to do this. And I created an index which just said, let me just show you. I said, if attribute equals store number, then give me 3. If attribute equals category ID, then 1. Vendor number, then 2. And the reason I did that was just to have an integer to work with instead of a text value. Is that you're basically kind of creating a star schema anytime you're creating a tabular model is what you're doing here. The source of this data is just a bunch of spreadsheets that I found. But you could use it for any source data. The thing is you have to have what's called a fact table, which is going to have all your something usually like sales or, it's not going to have a lot of dimension information. It's just going to have like an ID that points to your store, an ID that points to your category, and then it'll have numbers like, oh, I made this much in dollars, I had this quantity, and that's what a fact table is basically. So going back to the dynamic table, I then removed the other columns, so now I just have 2 columns. They're both integers. One's the index and one's the attribute index. And again, you'll see I'm still having 3 indexes with 3 different values for each index value. And now when we go back to the main table, I'm going to show you the relationships now that we've asked about this. Whoops. Hold on a second. Let me get that out of there. Make this a little smaller so you can see it. Now, the 2 things that I want to show you that are bad to do that you have to do to make this work are these two-way relationships. It has to happen for both the holiday date periods and for the dynamic access, or neither of them will work. These can cause performance issues. Don't ever use two-way relationships unless you absolutely have to. So if you run into performance issues, it may be that you just have too much data and you can't use this kind of relationship without it causing a lot of issues, and you may have to look for something else to do. But in smaller data sets and data sets where you can have a small table for your dynamic access, if you can filter it down to just the records you need and a small, like say you only want to be able to look back 90 days, do that in your dynamic access table and this will be golden. And it gives you this really cool effect. Would all these steps be necessary? If you want to do this, yes, they are, except for the additional step I created at the end where I created an integer instead of just using the regular value. You can use just the regular value if you want. So I have this schema here, and the way I like to do it is I like to have my fact table at the bottom, and I go upward so it's easier to read and you can see how things relate to each other very quickly. These are all my measure tables and my slicer tables. They're not related to anything, but they still show up in your model. Oh, look, I hadn't upgraded that. Of course, now it's hard to see. Let me make that bigger. It's the fun of Power BI. It changes every month. So now if I go back, we can look at these tables. I have the item to group by, which is this metric to use table. I have the number of records to display, which is the top end table that we created with our what if parameter. And you can use the same what if parameter on different pages for different what ifs. That's the really cool thing about it. You don't need to make a second what if for everything you do. And the way I handle having these two against each other is if you go to Format and Edit Interactions, you want to make sure that this what if isn't affecting this table. So you can see I've turned off interactions for everything from these slicers to this table. And I've turned off everything from these slicers to this table. That's a really important thing to do. Otherwise, you will find that both tables are doing the same thing or both tables are giving you nothing because they're contradicting with each other. Okay, so watch what happens now. So on this one, I'm going to change from city and state to vendor. Again, super fast, as you can see, but this is because I have a small data set. If you have a small data set, this will just wow your users. Even if I want to change it, give me 21 records. Again, almost instant. So how much time do we have up? Oh, we've gone over, but I think that's okay because I took a little bit of time with everything breaking on GoToWebinar. So I will take some more questions now for those of you who can still stay a few more minutes. And make sure that you get this link. I think everyone should be able to find the link now. If you, again, go to handouts and go to webinar in the interface, download that Power BI Trickery handout, and you will find the link to the files on the last page of that handout, the second to last page, actually. Does anyone have more questions? Okay, I think that no one has any more questions. Some of you have said thank you. Thank you for attending. And again, my apologies for the technical glitches we had this time. If anyone does want extra things from me, please feel free to email me. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. I live, breathe, and eat this Power BI stuff. It's my favorite thing to do. And I'm always happy to talk to new users. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for taking the time to host this webinar. As Robin was saying before, if you guys have any questions, I know a few people have emailed me, but for any reason you can't get the handout in the handout section that also contains the link to the files. If you guys can't get that, please feel free to email me. You guys can email me at kreyes@3cloudsolutions.com. My email is everywhere on these webinars, so please feel free to email me. I also dropped the link into the chat right now. As well as I dropped the link earlier to the files that Robin was using. But like I said, if you guys can't get that, please feel free to reach out to Robin or myself. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out as well. Like I said before, the webinar recording will be in you guys' email tomorrow around noon Eastern Standard Time. So look out for that. If you guys don't receive that for any reason, please feel free to email me and I'll be happy to take care of you guys. I hope you guys have a good rest of your wonderful Tuesday. Robin, again, thank you so much for hosting. I know GoToWebinar was being a little rude, but we appreciate you hosting, and you guys have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.